Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Magic in His Kiss by Anabelle Bryant. Narrated by Victoria Aston. 1. Sofia Gallo was a thief, a common pilferer, pickpocket, swindler. She knew better than to soften the harshness of that reality. By definition, anyone who stole another person's property, especially by stealth and without use of force or violence, deserved the label. And Sofia fit the profile. Maybe not in the conventional sense of the word, although that could be true. English was her second language, and Italian her mother tongue. Nuance and innuendo weren't often taught in textbooks. Dismissing the idea, she tucked an unruly curl behind her ear and ducked into a shadowy alcove at the corner of Jermyn Street so she could survey the throng of well-heeled afternoon shoppers as they bustled along with their business. Smoothing her bag of stolen treasures further beneath her cloak, she waited for an opportune moment to blend into the mix. Perhaps thief was too strong a label for what she did every Thursday morning. She was more a rescuer of sorts, a salvager who cared about reclaiming what was otherwise discarded and cast aside, unwanted and terribly undervalued. She wrinkled her nose at the ignorant assumption made by others. So many things in life were carelessly discarded. Scraps of paper and lace, leftover food, broken hearts, people. Drawing a deep breath, she focused on the busy thoroughfare, unwilling to allow sadness to permeate her successful outing. She'd learned in several difficult lessons not all opinions were valued equally. Some people automatically considered her the worst kind of thief because they'd decided she'd stolen lucre from his wife. Which wasn't true. Sofia hadn't even known he was married at the time they'd taken up with each other and fallen in love. That essential fact made it difficult to bear responsibility for everything that had happened afterward, even if the same series of events had proven terribly unfortunate. Her brothers discovered the truth before she did, and with that knowledge they turned her world upside down, removing her from Italy, separating her from scandal, and subsequently moving their tumbling act to England, where they now lived and worked at Vauxhall Gardens, the ideal location for a new beginning. A place where the ordinary became the extraordinary, where people imagined their past, present, and future with the fickle creativity of a whimsical daydream. How very convenient. She sighed an exhale composed of frustration and despair, aware the swift, dizzying series of events had left little time for her broken heart to mend. However, this was not a morning for looking back. She was in a race against the clock, and the road ahead was the only decision worth considering. Literally. Assured in her timing, she stepped from the alcove and continued toward Bond Street, on through the crowded walkways with the confidence and agility that served her well during her tumbling routine. Petite in stature, she moved with an innate effortless grace few refined ladies or obedient debutantes mastered, despite a lifetime of etiquette training and ballroom dancing tutelage. No one gave Sofia a second glance, not the profligate dowagers out to add an expensive bonnet to an already excessive collection, or the reckless gentlemen rushing off to waste money at their club. She went unnoticed, nothing more than a fleeting shadow on the cobblestones. Let the haute ton assume she was just another overburdened maid out to do her lady's bidding. Except she wasn't a maid. She didn't have a lady to attend, and the bag she clutched against her ribs was filled with stolen valuables. Possessions no member of better society would offer her, or could offer her, because the items in the bag provided hope and possibility. Bond Street and the surrounding shopping district was a world beyond Sofia's reach, which made the coveted pouch nestled against her heart all the more priceless. No one knew of her secretive jaunts into better London to accomplish the task. It was dangerous and enthralling, and just a little bit frightening, like the first time she attempted a triple twist double somersault combination. Whenever she closed her eyes and concentrated, she could relive that precious moment. The pulse of fear that transformed into a beat of pride and accomplishment, the thunder of her heart so pronounced she barely heard the swell of applause that followed her successful tumbling feat. Every Thursday morning, when she filled her bag and scurried home, a similar feeling bubbled up inside her. She turned the corner toward Oxford Street and pulled up short, melting into the shade of a nearby awning. Across the street, her brother Alessandro was making his way through the bustle with a purposeful stride. Why would he be in this part of London? His appearance was as out of place as her own, and his opinion of the surrounding crowd of a similar nature. How curious indeed. Still, Sophia had no desire to be discovered. Her brothers were already terribly protective and overbearing. Having to explain herself and risk the possibility of provoking their suspicions as to her whereabouts and purpose was out of the question. She watched from the shadows as he turned the corner, his broad form moving through the pedestrian traffic with ease. She only stared after him another minute. As much as she'd like to determine his destination, her own agenda was far more important. The remaining walk to Kennington Street, where she shared rented rooms with her brothers in a boarding house, passed by quickly. The sky was bright blue with a scattering of wispy clouds. The temperature was equally satisfactory, the breeze just strong enough to offer a friendly reminder of its existence. She crossed the street, her eyes on the downstairs window, where Topolina, her beloved cat, waited in a ray of sunshine. After she tucked away her precious loot, she'd take Topolina out to the garden behind the boarding house. A little quiet time would do nicely before Sophia joined her brothers at Vauxhall. They practiced their tumbling routine daily to prepare for 2 nightly performances. Her brothers were always thinking of new ways to dazzle spectators, and they strove for perfection. To that goal, they rarely went a day without honing their skills. Now, with her mission accomplished, Sophia donned a pelisse and settled on the stone bench beneath the lone hawthorn tree inside the modest, gated yard. This spot was her own personal sanctuary, cosily situated beside a bed of violets and warmed by a generous cascade of sunlight. Topolina, having lazed about enough this morning, leapt from her arms in a blur of grey fur and stepped lively through the overgrown grass on a treasure hunt of her own. Using her hand to shade her eyes, Sophia glanced to the second-floor window. A new tenant had moved in after her best friend Lola had left. Lola was recently married and very much in love. Sophia sighed with appreciation at the thought. She would miss having her dearest friend and confidant only a flight of stairs away, but Sophia was too happy for Lola to begrudge her friend's romantic situation. Besides, soon after Lola left, someone else had leased the apartment upstairs. A young single man named Noah Wright. He was unmistakably handsome. However, upon their introduction, she'd noticed his easy smile and kind, affable nature more than his physical attributes. At least that's what she told herself, since no one could overlook his fair hair and twinkling blue eyes, or the slightest shadow of a beard that traced his jawline and dipped darker at the centre, where she noticed a charming cleft in his chin. They'd only spoken once, and just for a few minutes, but she'd learned he was a bachelor and in search of employment here in London. When he'd mentioned he performed magic, she'd offered to introduce him to Mr. Morland, the manager at Vauxhall Gardens. That said, nothing had come of it yet. And then, as if the thought of Mr. Wright had conjured him into existence, he appeared out of thin air. So lost in her ruminations, she'd never heard the clack of the back door when it closed behind him. "Good day, Miss Gallo." His voice held a convivial tone beyond politeness, like he truly felt happy to see her. "Hello, Mr. Wright." She glanced up from where she sat on the bench. pleased she wouldn't have to squint. He was the perfect height and stood in the exact location to block the sun from her eyes. "Are you all settled in?" "I suppose I am, for the most part, anyway," he said, casting his eyes to the upstairs window. "Since the apartment was already furnished and I only brought a few trunks to London, it didn't take long to put everything in its place." "That's good." She looked toward Topolina, who seemed captivated by something held hostage between her paws. "How long will you stay in London?" "However long it takes for me to accomplish my goal." His expression shifted, and the muscles of his jaw tensed. Had she given him her full attention instead of watching her cat, she might have better understood this change in emotion. Instead, once she met his eyes, the hardness that had accompanied his reply vanished. Certainly there was more to discover about Mr. Wright's relocation to the city. "You've only to let me know when you're ready, and I'll introduce you to Mr. Morland. As the manager of Vauxhall Gardens, he's always searching for talented performers." "You think I'm talented?" he asked with a wag of his chin. "Well, you did make your apartment key appear from behind my ear when we first met." "That was a simple sleight of hand manoeuvre, nothing more," he said, with what seemed intentional modesty. "Then I look forward to seeing what other tricks you have up your sleeves." She hadn't meant for her words to sound flirtatious. Honestly, she couldn't explain what provoked her to reply the way she had. Yet her mention of his shirt sleeves brought her eyes to his strong forearms dusted with blonde hair and exposed by the rolled cuffs of his shirt. Perhaps he'd been cleaning before he'd come outside. She averted her attention reluctantly, realizing her brothers would lock her in her room if they suspected she had the slightest personal interest in Mr. Wright, which she didn't, of course. She'd only just met him and wasn't looking for any kind of private entanglement, not after what had happened with Luca. No, she needed to concentrate solely on her tumbling, just as her brothers told her. Sometimes she wondered if they'd realized she'd grown up since they'd left Italy. She was nearly 25 years old now, a woman with goals, dreams, and a mind of her own. "Miss Gallo?" Mr. Wright's voice interrupted her musings, pulling her to the present with considerable embarrassment. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Wright." A little laugh chased her apology. "I was lost in thought for a moment. Your accent." He paused as his eyes searched her face. The corner of his mouth turned up as if she'd amused him. "You're not from England, are you?" This time she laughed outright. "One doesn't need to know magic to draw that conclusion. Dio mio, just listen to me." When he waited for her to continue, she returned her eyes to Topolina, unwilling to allow him to see the emotions that accompanied her reply. "My brothers and I left Italy 5 years ago. We moved here to promote our tumbling skills." While not altogether honest, her words weren't a lie either. The practiced confession fell somewhere in between. "So, once again our conversation leads back to Vauxhall Gardens." "It is my home away from home." "Away from Italy." "Yes, that's true. At Vauxhall we're an odd lot, but we're also a wonderful makeshift family." She turned to face him. "For better or for worse." "Sounds like a fascinating place to work." "Oh, it is," she said, more comfortable discussing the entertainment grounds instead of her personal history. "If you've never visited Vauxhall Gardens, you should go and explore its many wonders. You may as well know whether or not you would like to work there before you seek employment. My brothers and I could assist you." "Thank you. I appreciate your suggestions and kindly accept." Mr. Wright was undeniably handsome, and his friendly demeanour made her want to help him, but there was another, more intriguing reason she'd taken notice. Since leaving Italy and the messy situation with Luca, she hadn't experienced a tug of attraction toward anyone, until Mr. Wright. He did cause her to wonder. Of course, these feelings were something to keep to herself and probably meaningless. She didn't know a thimbleful of information about him. Spending time together would prove the only way to discover more. Sneaking out of the pavilion and away from her brother's watchful notice was possible, and she'd accomplished it before. However, if Mr. Wright was going to work at Vauxhall and live in the apartment above hers, it made sense to include everyone in a transparent circle of friendship. If Mr. Wright turned out to be as charming as his first impression, she didn't want her brothers to make assumptions or draw conclusions too quickly. Besides, she'd learned in the past that some secrets are best kept hidden in plain sight. 2. Noah gazed at Miss Gallo, noting how the sunlight highlighted the chestnut-coloured waves in her shoulder-length hair. It likely felt as silky as it looked, and he rubbed his fingertips together as if he could somehow conjure the sensation. Her olive skin and bow-shaped lips only added to her unexpected loveliness. She was young and pretty, with a smile that surely broke hearts on a daily basis. Above all else, she seemed unassuming and innocent. He remembered the way she'd welcomed him upon his arrival to the boarding-house. At the moment, her cat monopolized her attention. If he wasn't mistaken, Topolina meant little mouse in Italian. Noah spoke 4 languages, and as the son of an earl had had the luxury of travelling from country to country to practice his fluency. But he didn't wish to share details about his family ties or personal history with Miss Gallo or any other acquaintances. He was here in London, posing as an ordinary fellow for one purpose only: revenge. And when the task was complete, he'd pack his trunks and return to his regular life. A life far different from the one he portrayed at the moment. Leasing the apartment and finding employment at Vauxhall as a magician were convenient steps in perpetuating his purpose. He'd always had a knack for magic, and years ago, when it was discovered his little sister couldn't abide riding in a carriage without emptying her stomach, he taught himself enough magic to distract Lucy, even for the longest ride. What he wouldn't give to hear her laughter when he produced her favourite stuffed bear from the sleeve of his coat. But that was a wasted wish. Lucy was dead. All he had was her memory and the desire to see the man responsible pay for what he'd done. Oddly enough, the magic he learned for Lucy's benefit would serve him well in seeking revenge. His skills would help him pass for an adequate entertainer, or maybe better than that. Miss Gallo worked with performers of all kinds, and she'd expressed he'd be a good fit for Vauxhall Gardens. If walking about the grounds pulling colourful scarves from a top hat provided him with access to information he'd otherwise never discover, he was prepared for the task. But first he needed to locate his brother here in London and sort out their differences. Proceeding with his plan would be easier if he had a familial ally working with him toward the same goal. "Mr. Wright?" Apparently it was his turn to be called to task. "Excuse me," he offered her a quick smile. "You should call me Noah. There's no need to speak so formally when we're neighbours, and with any luck, co-workers too." She looked startled, and he took advantage of her hesitation. "I have an idea. When I met your brothers the other day, they described the Gallo tumbling show. It sounds fascinating, and I'd like very much to see it for myself. If you're agreeable, when your performance ends this evening, perhaps we can walk through Vauxhall together and you can show me what there is to see." "Yes." Her brows pinched together as if she gave his suggestion careful consideration. "That would be fine, although there is too much to accomplish in just one night. At the least we can begin, and you can decide if you'd like to work there. If you don't find me in the practice tent, my brothers and I will meet you in the pavilion. It's the largest white building at the centre of the grounds." "Excellent," he replied. "Now that we have that settled, I should return upstairs to practice my magic. I will see you this evening after I purchase my ticket. It's only a few shillings for an entrance pass," she added, her gaze alight with amusement as she stared up at him. She really was delightful. Her large green eyes could certainly cast a spell. He recognized the lively mischief in them as they sparkled in the gleam of the sun. "I'm sure I have a few shillings somewhere," He patted his left trouser pocket and pulled out a blue handkerchief. Nope, that's not it. Tugging on the cloth, he presented a vibrant rainbow of silky squares, all attached at the corners, overflowing in his grasp as he sorted through them hand over hand. Sofia laughed with delight, and he grinned despite himself. Any practice of his modest inventory of tricks would serve him well. He discarded the handkerchiefs to the bench and patted his right pocket next. "Perhaps I put the coins in here." He watched as her gaze followed his hand, but this time he produced a deck of ordinary playing cards. Fanning them with a flourish once, then twice, he gathered the cards into a pile and offered them forward. "Pick a card, Miss Gallo, and I will do my very best to divine which suit you've chosen." He tried for an inviting tone. Her slender brows rose high with skepticism, but she didn't remark on his request. Instead, she reached for the cards, her delicate fingertips hovering over them as she hesitated in her decision. She almost touched the top card until she changed her mind and selected one from the centre of the deck. "Ah," he said, impressed by her coy manoeuvre. "I see you're familiar with this little game." She tried her best to stifle a smile, though he noticed how the corners of her mouth resisted the effort. "Now, if you'll be so kind as to lay the card flat against your heart, I will tell you which suit you have chosen." Her smile dropped away and she sat up straighter. "Against my heart? I've only seen magicians ask for the card to be pressed to one's forehead." She wrinkled her nose and began to move the playing card upward. "Miss Gallo," he objected in a firm yet kind voice, "I'm not like other magicians. I have my own way of doing things, and I'd appreciate if you wouldn't assume my tricks are similar to others you may have experienced." His comment seemed to mollify her objection, though she still eyed him warily. With reluctance, she moved the card to her bodice and placed it flat against the pale green muslin, her palm covering it protectively. He paused, watching myriad emotions flash in her crystalline eyes. Was she worried he could discern her secrets? This trick was nothing more than a magician's standard repertoire. "Well?" she asked, seemingly impatient to have the task completed. "Which card have I chosen?" "King of Hearts," he answered with confidence. She gasped, and he couldn't help but chuckle at her astonishment. "But how could you know?" she asked, bewilderment alive in every syllable. "I purposely took a card from the middle. You couldn't possibly have memorized every card and its placement in the deck." "I'm sorry, but I can't reveal my secrets, Miss Gallo." He reached forward and slipped the card from her grasp. "That wouldn't be wise, especially if I'm to best the other magicians at Vauxhall." "I suppose that's true." She huffed a little breath that could have been composed of appreciation or frustration. He didn't know her well enough yet. "Or maybe you were just lucky this time," she suggested. Now. He attempted a scowl before he produced a shiny coin from his otherwise empty palm. "There we go." "Mr. Wright," she said, adopting a condescending tone, though her eyes gleamed with pleasure. "That is not a shilling. That's a crown. You'd do yourself well to know the difference. There are all sorts at Vauxhall. Only a fool would trust a stranger to tell the truth when it comes to money matters." That was a lesson Emmett Dixon had taught his family well. Topolina came to settle at the foot of the bench, sprawling out lazily near the side of Miss Gallo's slipper. "I'm sure that's the case. Thank you for your good advice," he teased, returning the deck of cards to his pocket. "What do you think, Topolina?" He leaned down and gathered the cat into his arms. Standing up again, he scratched lightly along her neck and was rewarded with a drowsy meow. "Was that trick clever enough to please Mr. Morland?" "Oh, he'll hire you," Sofia said, her cheerful tone having returned. "He's always looking for new talent." "So you do think I'm talented?" "What I think doesn't matter," she replied, standing up and taking a stride toward him. "I will see you later this evening, Mr. Wright. Be sure to learn your coins by then. Now, if you will kindly return my cat." She reached out with open arms, and Topolina immediately made the leap. "You must be magic indeed. Topolina has discerning taste, and has taken to only a few people," she remarked before she made for the door. Noah watched as Sofia walked inside, wondering what Miss Gallo would think when she discovered he'd slipped the King of Hearts into the pocket of her pelisse. However, his amusement didn't last, as his thoughts circled back to the main purpose of his trip to London and the inconvenience of finding his brother Charlie. Even though Charlie and Noah were as close as two brothers could be, their opinions were more often opposed, their personalities as different as the sun and the moon. Charlie was quick to temper and impulsive. He rarely considered the consequences of his choices. By contrast, Noah's actions were more calculated and determined. Most of the time, they counterbalanced each other, but then everything had unravelled after the sudden death of their sister Lucy. The tragedy had affected each of them differently. When Emmett Dixon first began courting his sister Noah, along with his father and brother, welcomed the gentleman, and believed his desire to pursue a relationship with Lucy was genuine and sincere. It didn't take long for Lucy to declare herself in love, an illusion Dixon encouraged, though it was later discovered his intentions were dark and deceitful. Dixon wasn't interested in a beautiful young woman to marry and share his life. Instead, he'd manipulated Lucy and preyed on her affections in order to insinuate herself into their family's trust. Thoroughly fooled by the man's lies, Noah's father invested a large sum in what he accepted as an investment for his daughter's future security, but turned out to be nothing more than a thief's ruse. Once Dixon absconded with the money and the truth was realized, Lucy fell into a deep malaise. She became a hollow shell, as if by crying so much she'd not only emptied herself of sorrow, but every other emotion along with it. Shortly after, she was found dead in her bedroom. The physicians whispered unthinkable suggestions, yet Noah found the questionable circumstances of her death unacceptable. Did Dixon know what he'd caused with his callous rejection and theft? Noah's immediate reaction was to seek out Dixon, but mourning his sister's passing took precedence. It was only after several months that Noah could even consider it. But not Charlie. Consumed with rage, he'd hastily packed his belongings and left for London, intent on locating the man they believed had caused their sister's demise. Noah had approached the tragedy with deliberate intention. He'd made specific inquiries and planned for several weeks, solidifying a plan to avenge his sister's death. Naturally, a part of him objected to retribution. He was the son of a peer after all. However, he also believed his family would find no peace in allowing the matter to remain unresolved and Dixon unpunished. It wasn't solely about the loss of a considerable sum of money. For Noah, it went deeper. He needed Dixon to know what he'd done, how he'd broken Lucy's spirit and stolen her will to live right along with the investment funds. And he needed to stop Dixon from ever causing such devastating heartbreak again. How could Noah and Charlie not seek revenge? Their mother had died years ago, but their elderly father lived on, indelibly saddened that his youngest child had been taken from him. Revenge settled the matter and offered some modicum of retribution for a life lost wrongly. But more than that, revenge honoured his sister's memory and punished the miserable cad who'd caused Lucy so much irreversible pain. Dixon had spoken of an acquaintance in London, a man named Lewis Morland, who worked as the manager of Vauxhall Gardens. He'd shared stories of their history together. It was the one solid connection Noah had to finding Dixon, but that didn't mean it would be an easy task, especially if Dixon and his friend were equally distrustful. Clenching his teeth, Noah forced himself to exhale slowly in an attempt to assuage an immediate spike of anger. Lucy was only 20 years old. She was full of life, vibrant and generous with her time, always helping others. She possessed the ability to light up the room with a single word or smile. Yet none of them, not Charlie, their father, or Noah himself, were able to see what was clearly right in front of them. He realized now she'd only revealed what she wanted them to believe, suffering in silence when she'd fallen into despair. There was no turning back time, no fixing what went unnoticed, but Noah was here in London now. His plan was already begun, and nothing was going to stop him from seeing it through to the end. 3. Sofia settled on the padded mats strewn across the floor of the tent where each afternoon she practiced her tumbling routine. Bending at the waist, she gently touched the tip of her nose to her knees, wrapping her fingers around the soles of her feet as she eased herself flat. Her body had always seemed more flexible than the average person.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?